What's on your perfectly adequate radar, Ryan?
So last week, a group of plaintiffs won a truly astounding victory when President Biden announced that he would be seizing $3.5 billion of Afghanistan's central bank reserves and holding it for family members of 9/11 victims who had sued the Taliban. Now, that kind of win takes a legal village. But it was a victory in particular for one high-profile attorney who has long specialized in suing foreign governments on behalf of the victims of terrorism, Lee Wolosky. Last week, Wolosky and his colleagues sent a letter to the judge handling their lawsuit preparing to claim the money. He's listed as the top lawyer on the case there. Previously, Wolosky also represented the families of 9/11 victims in an effort to seize funds from the Iranian central bank held in Luxembourg, arguing that Iran had aided al-Qaeda. Luxembourg ultimately ruled that the sovereign immunity of Iran took precedence over the plaintiff's claim. Wolosky entered as an attorney on the Taliban case in January 2021, according to his filing with the court. But that's not all that Wolosky did last year. In September, he was brought into the White House to work as an attorney on, yes, issues related to Afghanistan. In September, Wolosky was brought in to help run the evacuee project and, according to Axios, as well as to work on other issues related to the U.S. drawdown from Afghanistan. Wolosky's representative referred questions to the White House, and the White House has said that Wolosky recused himself from discussions over the question of whether he and his clients ought to seize the Afghan central bank's money. Spokesperson said Lee Wolosky's service as an SGE at the White House counsel's office ended on January 6, 2022. Lee was formally recused from all matters related to Jenner and Block during his time as an SGE. Given his past representation of the victims of 9/11, he was specifically recused and walled off from any and all discussions related to any litigation related to the victims of 9/11, including but not limited to the disposition of the Afghan reserves at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. I want to welcome now to the show my Intercept colleague, Lee Fang, who reported this story. And to start, Lee, can you tell us more about how this long shot case even came about, and who is Lee Wolosky?
Well, look, after September 11th, many lawsuits, at least half of a dozen lawsuits were filed on behalf of the 9/11 victims, both families of folks who died in those attacks and others who were affected by the health hazards, the debris and others that killed folks in lower Manhattan. Those cases were filed against many different governments. There are different kind of competing cases, including lawsuits against the government of Iran, against Saudi Arabia, against the government of Afghanistan, against the Taliban, and others. This has been a 20-year fight to receive those funds. Congress has appropriated money to special funds to pay out some of these victims. Many of these victims are entitled to as much as $10 million or more, and many payouts have already gone out through money that's been appropriated by Congress. There's been, of course, also a lobbying fight to change the sovereign immunity laws to allow these victims and their attorneys to sue governments, including Saudi Arabia and others that are accused of being state sponsors of terror. So this is really a multi-decade fight. This is big money involved. It kind of depending on the case, there are different rules around the compensation of attorneys, but that's also been a contentious issue. In some of these funds, lawyers are entitled to only 10 or 15% of the fees, but these are attorneys working on contingency. So, typically we're seeing cases where attorneys could be entitled to as much as 30% or more. So given the huge amounts of money involved, the large sums, many law firms have been involved. This latest Havlish case, which represents a section of those victims suing the Taliban and the Afghanistan government. Last August, there was a judgment to go to the Federal Reserve after that the Taliban took over the Afghan government and to seize all deposits there, all $7 billion of Afghan money, and pay that out to the Havlish plaintiffs. That's been working its way through court, but finally last Friday, with Biden making that executive order that he will indeed seize that money and provide half of it, $3.5 billion, to those plaintiffs. That's been a watershed moment in this case, and of course directly involves the unfurling humanitarian crisis there, because since the seizure of those central bank funds and frozen assets by the Biden administration, coupled with the direct sanctions on the Taliban and the Afghan government, we've seen a complete meltdown of the Afghan economy, a shrinking GDP, skyrocketing food and fuel prices. Afghan individuals, because of the seizure of these funds, can't receive payments from the government. Workers are not being paid in terms of police and healthcare workers. A gigantic crisis in terms of starvation. Millions are facing starvation. But for these lawyers and for these plaintiffs seeking funds, this was a big victory.
And so, what do you make of the government's response to this specific attorney, Wolosky? Is that what you said his name was? That he was not involved. They're saying he's was not involved in the strategy discussions around this. Is that persuasive based on your reporting?
I don't find it persuasive. Look, we did a story last year on kind of Biden's shadow chief of staff, his top campaign advisor during the presidential campaign was Anita Dunn. She leads one of the most prestigious lobbying and consulting and public affairs PR firms in Washington, SKD Knickerbocker. They represent Pfizer, the makers of one of the main COVID vaccine, many different food companies, tech companies, hospital interests. She went into government, into the White House, making decisions, influencing decisions on a range of issues that clearly affected her former clients, but she never divested herself or truly left SKD Knickerbocker. It was the same situation as Lee Wolosky. She took a special designation, this SGE designation, which means she did not have to file a public financial disclosure. There's way less scrutiny in what she was doing. Her position in the White House was supposedly temporary. She could only work there for 130 days. The White House said the same thing. Oh, of course she's walled off. But for anyone who's been covering this White House, who's been following White House issues, she clearly was working on issues that affected her former clients, particularly firms such as Pfizer. This is another case. Here is an individual, Lee Wolosky, who specializes in suing on behalf of victims, who was attempting to seize central bank funds previously from Iran, and now at a law firm that's leading the case to seize the central bank funds from Afghanistan. And he was brought on to advise the National Security Council on Afghan issues. What has the Biden administration done on Afghanistan? One of their biggest decisions, other than reviving the Bush administration era sanctions on the Taliban and not really loosening any of the screws there, is the seizure of Afghan bank funds. That's really kind of the biggest Biden policy following the withdrawal of troops that has happened. So it's kind of implausible to believe this claim that he was walled off from this decision while working specifically at the National Security Council on Afghan issues.
Right, and it goes to the question of how decisions are made, because the White House is saying that he was formally recused, and there's paperwork involved in that. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say that this paperwork was filled out and that he was officially recused from this. What that would mean is that, okay, we're having this meeting at 1 o'clock where we're going to discuss whether we're going to seize this central bank funds for the clients of Wolosky. And he said, well, I can't go to that meeting. Those are my clients. I'm recused from that. Or if it comes up on an agenda, he would have to not participate in that part of the meeting and have to step out of the meeting. But as the statement from the White House said, everyone knew that he was representing these families. It was public already that this is what he does. And so he doesn't need in the meeting or in the Zoom to say, yes, I think I should get that money. I think my clients should get that money and I should get a percentage of it. He doesn't need to be there to say that because his views are known. So Lee, when you think about the criticism of the Afghanistan government over the last 20 years as hopelessly corrupt, does this arrangement kind of put that in a new light?
I mean, look, the level of opaque decision making around this White House decision to seize these funds is just astounding. The public pressure, NGOs, activists, the Afghan people, the former Afghan government, refugees from around the world is all focused on, over the last few months, on demanding that the Biden administration release these funds. By seizing these central bank funds, they have frozen and destroyed the Afghan financial system. If you're an Afghan person, you can't withdraw money from the bank. They're effectively cut out from the SWIFT system, so any money transfer from any Western bank or bank around the world to just pay employees in Afghanistan gets held up. There's a liquidity crisis because you can't, if you're in Afghanistan, just get hard fiat currency. Everything revolves around this decision around the central bank. And so for this claim that Lee Wolosky had completely walled himself off against any kind of influence around this central policy of the Biden administration on Afghanistan, while his job was simply advising the National Security Council on Afghan issues, it defies any logic or kind of common sense here.
And more than 1 million refugees since October have fled Afghanistan. It's a crisis of biblical proportions. Lee, great reporting. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
And our rising panel joins us next. Stick around for that.